I'll introduce myself real quick again. Andrew McKechnie. I manage the regional healthcare banking group at Columbia Bank, which you see the two logos at the top. We are merging with Umpqua Bank here in about 30 days. So we'll double in size. We also have a national healthcare team. So I handle 4 states, and the national healthcare team is the other 46. And a real quick snapshot, we bank, lend to mainly, but bank both about 2,000 dentists. My group does about 500 veterinarians, 200 optometrists, and then 500 other medical professionals. And we have about 1.5 billion in outstanding loan totals in 4 states, plus our national team. So we've been doing this quite a while. I've been at Columbia now for 14 years, and I've been in banking for 25 plus. And by and large, the bulk of it's been specializing in healthcare lending and healthcare facilities of all sorts. So that's the background. So if you get the next slide for me, Jessica, that'd be great. So this presentation it's lengthy, so I'm not going to go through every single slide, and it's meant for different audiences. Much like I saw some of the other speakers coming on that are more specific to clinical things for you guys. A lot of this is really meant for a lot of bankers and banker type meetings. So we'll get through some of these slides a lot quicker. But fraud is a huge issue right now. And I don't know if anyone on this call has experienced it or they know people that experienced it, but I'm guessing both in some capacity. And in the last 2 years, the amount of fraud that's been attempted or actually seen all the way through on our clients has tripled. So, and I don't think we're unique. It's happening all across banking. So real quick, we're going to talk about some fraud risks. We're going to talk about business email compromising, which is a big way for them to get into what and how to steal from you on a regular basis, potentially. Check fraud, just a few things there, and some actions and some security things that we've done and that a lot of our clients do. So if we go to the next slide. So these are some fraud risks. Again, one of the big ones is business email, and we'll talk about it in more detail as we go through here. But people impersonate either a client, with the bank, so meaning that they come in and they spoof the bank that they're actually a dentist or a medical professional, and that they're contacting us to do something on behalf of you as the client. And that happens a lot. That's probably 50% of what we see right now in terms of fraud. Then there's other things that can impact you that may or may not even involve the bank: direct deposit fraud, payroll, tax fraud. We've seen some of that. And then general check fraud is way more sophisticated than it used to be 20 years ago. It used to be that someone would lose their checkbook and then some checks would be taken out of the back and someone's writing checks off that. A lot of people don't use checks anymore. These are checks that are being created by the criminals with perfect MICR encoding lines and information on them that actually fools the bank and the Federal Reserve System. So that's a serious issue now. Next slide, please. So one of the things, this is just the title slide, obviously, to this section, but one of the things that we do, and I would recommend that a lot of people, even outside of banking or a large business like us, but even a small business, do. Whenever I get an email that's external to me at the bank, it shows up with a red highlight on it saying this is an external email. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that I need to have some awareness to the fact that this is not something that's been secured in our system, and it still needs to be vetted. And most of the time when there's fraud being committed, there are external emails that phish you. So if you don't have some sort of warning that it's an external email outside of your system, it can appear as though it's in your system. So that's just a kind of an overview of a big thing about external emails. So next slide, please. So what I alluded to is that these groups are very organized now. They target, they're both national and international syndicates and crime rings and so on and so forth. And they structure their timing so that they're trying to profile different people. They find your information on the internet, on LinkedIn, and they take that information and they work backwards. And they work on figuring out who you are professionally, how they can take on that persona via email, so that when they eventually perpetuate what they're doing to a lending institution or a bank like ourselves, it appears it's coming from that professional person. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a step-by-step of what they do in its simplest terms. But like I alluded to, they go in and they discover who you are, they discover who the employees are, they build a picture around that person so that they can present themselves, that they know a little bit about who that person is. If they take over your email, which we've also seen happen, where they get into your email and you don't know it, they change the rules in your email about what you've dictated, so that they may even change some of your code words or your safe, safety email accounts and so on. When someone asks you, hey, please verify this is you, we'll send you an email with a code, please respond with the code. They've changed that secondary email to their email. They get the code, and then it appears that they've acknowledged that it's you, and they continue forward owning your email, and you don't even know it. And that's where they create what we call a spoof, but they create a whole persona in an email and they own it. So next slide, please. So phishing is a term that I don't know if anyone on here has heard before, but we use it a lot in the banking sector, and we get phishing emails all the time. And again, they show up with the red highlights saying they're external. And this is part of them trying to figure out if they can break into your systems and get information, and they'll phish all different layers of our institution, trying to gather little bits and pieces of information that they put together into what they want to use to take money from you ultimately. We actually get tested, and people can do this outside of a banking system, where internally in your offices, you can set up an IT protocol that will send dummy phishing emails to your employees for them to respond. And what we have to do is we get them and we click on them and say, this appears to be phishing, and we get an attaboy for it. But really what it does is it makes your employees attuned to the fact that there's a lot of fraud going on, and that if something doesn't smell right in an email question or positioning for information, that you should probably designate it as something that needs to be quarantined into your IT world. Next slide, please. So the slide's a little convoluted, but we've all seen emails like this where typically there's grammatical errors in them. That's usually a big thing, especially because if they're international, English isn't the first language. And so there'll be a lot of grammatical errors and spelling mistakes on very common and simple words. And they'll assume things in an email, and they'll try and create a sense of urgency. And that seems to be top of the pyramid. It's the sense of urgency. They act like you've missed something. I'm following up on something you were supposed to follow up on. And so if you see those triggers and you don't recognize the person, which we'll get into here in a second, it usually isn't a real email, and they're usually after something a little nefarious. Next slide, please. So one of the things that happens in these is that the emails themselves, you'll notice little things when you start becoming more attuned to this, that they're not actually what you'd think. So at the top here, it's supposed to be, Fred Flintstone at Bedrock Brewing Company. And if you hover over the emails, sometimes you'll notice that that's not actually what it is, or there'll be a misspelling, or it'll show up in code like that, which is, it's going somewhere on the dark web and the dark net that is not a regular email address. So, and a lot of times what you'll see too is that for whatever reason, there'll be a name that doesn't match to the company, and then the company's name doesn't match to the bottom of the email signature, and then there'll be a misspelling in there. And I know all this stuff seems kind of pedestrian, but you'd be very surprised, I think, about how many people fall for it and end up losing money because of it. So just look at emails when they come through, even if you don't have the red alert kind of thing that's external. If you don't recognize it, I don't ever hit reply. If I don't recognize something, I may even try and call the person first, because once you hit reply, you've kind of opened your system up a bit. So next slide, please. So again, it's just, this is just what I was alluding to, just take some extra time. When you see emails coming you don't understand, review them, make sure the spellings are correct and the information appears to line up, and you can acknowledge that maybe it's a person that you don't know, but it seems plausible based on the information that's being presented. Next slide, please. So ultimately, we've evolved now in this discussion where the victim becomes convinced that if they've fallen for all these different steps, they've fallen for the phishing, whatever. Now they've fallen victim that they believe that the person who they're talking to via email is a real person. It's a real client potentially, and they're asking for information. And in some cases, that employee starts to follow through on what they're asking for. So that's where the real problem starts, is when there's an exchange of information. Next slide, please. So, and I'll give you some examples here, but we've seen this happen, and we've stopped the ones that I've been involved with. We've actually stopped 2 or 3 of them, and they were major dollar amounts. But that's typically what they do, is they want you to send a wire, because once wires leave the bank, they're tough to get back. They're a lot tougher to get back than putting a stop payment on a check, for example, or stopping a debit card or a Visa MasterCard transaction. If the bank and or you are compromised to the extent that the bank is sending out a wire, the wires are pretty immediate and tough to get back. There are a few steps in there we can get to maybe stop it, but they usually go to offshore accounts, and then the money's gone. And depending on the level of fraud, in most cases, the bank or banks involved will eat the money. And in some cases, the client didn't have the right protocols in place, and the client's going to take some of the loss, if not all the loss. So if your employee's at the point where or you're at the point where you're trying to exchange information for the third party that you don't quite know, maybe this will be a wake-up call to stop and think about it a little bit. So next slide, please. So check red flags, or fraud red flags, I should say. We can just go to the next slide, and I can talk about that real fast. So again, this seems antiquated. I know a lot of businesses obviously still write lots of checks. A lot of checks are digitally transmitted. You request a check, like when you do bill pay or online banking, and you request a check, that's a digital check now. The bank isn't, some cases they mail it, but a lot of times it's just digitally sent out. There may be an item that shows up as a copy in the bank system like this, but a lot of people don't write as many checks as they used to. But this is an example of what happens on check fraud. Banks have holds that they put on new accounts. They're supposed to. It used to be, because in the old days, before we had Check 21, which was all before digital, it would take a while for a check to clear to another bank. Now it's instantaneous. So they're allowed to take certain amounts of money out of a new account opening, and they know those limits. They know how to work around the bank limits and what the banks will approve as a matter of doing business, and they'll walk away in these transactions with $8,000 cash or $2,500 cash that's just gone. So the idea that you understand, again, back to what we talked about earlier, if a check's being presented for payment, make sure that you're looking at the name on the check, that the account number matches what we're talking about, the dollar amounts match, that the spellings are correct. You could even look up the bank to see that it's a real bank. All those things matter. So next slide, please. This has happened to me. This happens to everyone. It usually happens in the context of a credit card. We've probably all received at one point in time or another via your credit card, where there's an algorithm set up that they know your spending habits, they know where you buy things, they know where you live, and all of a sudden you've got charges in New York City, but you live in Los Angeles, and you'll get an alert, and they'll say, "Hey, is this your transaction?" We are trying to do that and catch more up on that on the check side. So we've created algorithms and artificial intelligence now within our platforms that catch spending habits. It doesn't mean it's completely right. It doesn't mean that you aren't buying something legally because you just got on a plane and you happen to be there. But there are flags that pop up in terms of the checks that you're writing being out of order, the dollar amounts being beyond what you normally do, being out of market, all sorts of things like that. So just know that that's something that all banks are headed to in terms of artificial intelligence and looking for algorithms and so on in your payment histories. Next slide, please. So we can go to the next one too. And this is actions to take. So it's hard for me when I'm talking about, especially about dental offices. I've got right here at the end, I've got 2 or 3 I'm going to share with you, and they were recent. One of them was just this last week that was a substantial amount of money. And I think what happens is that people just get complacent. The owners of the business, the dentists, the medical professionals get complacent in that, they have someone that works the front end for them, and they've been doing it a while. And it doesn't mean they're a dishonest person. It just means that every now and then you probably just need to check in. You just need to make sure that things are being done correctly. The balances are what you think they are. that you don't have any past due receivables, so on and so forth. These are kind of normal steps that are done at the bank level, where we have dual control and we have really strong passwords, which are a real pain, having to reset a 14-character password every 3 months. We have limits on things, that we can do. I have limits on what I can approve here. Those kinds of controls help reduce losses all across the board for us, for you guys, for everyone. And to check in on the process and procedures you've got. It's hugely important. It doesn't say you're going to 100% stop it, but if you do some of these things on a regular basis, you'll cut it way back. It's very impactful. So next slide, please. So again, it's always just kind of what we talked through here, but it's making sure you've got procedures in place, that you know where your risks lie. Is if you're taking in a lot of cash, if you keep a lot of cash in your bank account, if you've got one person who's in charge of everything, you don't have dual control, you're not prepared in case of an emergency. If something happens to you, what happens to the bookkeeping in your offices? Do you have a CPA or bookkeeper? Or is it all based on you and your front office person? Again, there's insurance products out there at times that aren't that expensive that protect you from some of the fraud that can take place. And I think more importantly too, is you just need to have a very good relationship with your professional partners, between, whoever's handling your data, whoever's handling your banking relationships, your CPAs, so on and so forth. Between all of you working and being consistent with this, you can find things and see emerging patterns. So it's just being aware of your business surroundings. Next slide, please. We can skip that. Security awareness. So again, this is something that happens on a very high level. We have not, knock on wood, been the victim of a ransomware attack yet, but one of our vendors was. And one of the bank vendors was recently hit by ransomware, and it shut down everything they were doing. They had to rebuild their entire IT system and reset everything for all the banks that they do business with. And then they had to send notifications to clients. Supply chain attacks, we've seen that. That's a very high level, probably not. It can impact all of us, but it's not really something I see. But I think it's extremely important that that people are aware of the damage that this kind of thing does and the cost to doing business that it does. So if you're watching this or doing this or seeing things on TV or watching things on social media about cyber threats and things, you think, well, it's too high level, it's never going to happen to me. It's just probably a good opportunity to go kick the tires again on what type of IT security you have built into your systems. Because you may think, well, I'm not going to lose that much money if this happens. But if your patient information is stolen and they commit identity theft or fraud off of that, that becomes a serious issue. And we've had medical professionals that I've seen in the healthcare, non-dental, but medical space that refused to go get a professional lockbox provider, for example. And they were using someone that was local, that was keeping the records manually in boxes in their garage. That was their lockbox. And that garage got broken into, and about 500 patients' information got stolen, and it materially damaged the practice. A lot of patients left when they figured out and heard what was going on. So I know we all say, we know this is old news, but it's always a good reminder. It's just, the criminals are going to be 2 or 3 steps ahead all the time. So if you're just looking at something now, you're probably behind what they're doing anyway. So next slide, please. So again, this is, all these things were just, I won't go through all of them, but these are things that I mentioned that we're doing as a bank and a lot of our clients are doing. But, you test and retest and measure employees, you train, you understand current trends and fraud trends, you update your staff. Maybe there's a newsletter or something. Maybe some of your partners have that says, okay, here's something that's going on in the market right now. Be aware of it. It's hugely important to stay updated on that stuff. Do all the antivirus software you can. Have a good IT company behind you. So just all of those bullet points are important. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one is something that you should never, any of these things. And I say this, and probably 20 times a year, I get a contact from a client saying, I just responded to an email. Someone from your bank was asking me for my social security number and PIN number, and on and on and on. All these items on the left, whether it's email, text, or incoming phone call, we are not asking you for that information. So if it's your bank, and some banks may vary a little bit, but we don't ask for that. And generally speaking, they shouldn't. They have all that information on file. They may ask you to confirm, a piece of your address. They may ask you to do that, but they're not going to call you. If you call the bank and they need to verify you, that's different versus the bank calling you and saying, hey, I need your address and I need your social security number and I need your PIN number. Don't answer that call. It's fraudulent. And I can give you some scenarios here in a minute, but just this is a list to live by. I would tell you this is a list I would live by with all the people you do business with. Next slide, please. So I'm going to, okay, so real quick, this is a cashier's check fraud. It's compromised email. We didn't recover the funds. I don't remember the exact dollar amount on this one, but it was probably 25 to 50 grand. And so the bank ate that. I've got a couple other scenarios that I don't have in this PowerPoint, but we can go to the next one. So this one was a pretty serious one. Because like a lot of institutions, we have we have investments and trust services and so on. And we had people contacting us pretending to be one of our clients, and through whatever took place, the bank ended up wiring out $450,000, and it wasn't recovered. So the bank takes an operating loss on that. And this happened about 6 or 7 years ago. So it was a while ago, but that kind of phishing operation happens all the time right now. And again, you see some of the hallmarks of it: misspellings in the email address. They spoofed the client's email account for responsiveness, and they wired the money, which is what they like to do. They like to wire the money. So it was a large dollar amount. So next scenario, please. Posing a bank control. Okay, so that's what, again, both sides, that's what they did there. They took control of the person's email. They took both sides of the communication. So it looked like things were being verified. They weren't. They wired the money. Again, if you see something about wires, that's typically going to be, if you don't recognize it, there's probably fraud behind it, because that's a quick way to get the money. So next slide, please. So where there's questions, I'm just going to give you a couple other scenarios real quick, and then I'll be done here. But let's see. This last week, we had a client whose checking account was the perpetrators, the criminals, took over the client's bank account, and they created faux digital checks from the client's bank account with MICR encoding at the bottom that matched up with not only the account number we had, but also it passed through the Fed Reserve and the bank checks and balances and procedures and policies and all the equipment. So as anyone was concerned by looking at it, it appeared to be a real check. This client kept $600,000 in their checking account, and that fluctuated. So part of the reason I'm telling you this is because we believe, and this was a dentist, we believe it might have been an inside job. We don't know for sure, but they didn't always keep $600,000 in their account. It would come up at a certain time of the month and go out for various reasons and then come back. And this person who committed the fraud wrote 4 checks, actually 6 checks, for $105,000 each. And they all cleared the account. And they all went to fraudulent accounts at other banks. So we caught it because of the algorithm thing, and we returned the checks to the other banks. But the problem is now the other banks, because of the way the policies and protocols are set up, the other banks have this 30-day window, 60-day window to look at things on their end. And what we've already concluded is that these accounts that were opened were fraudulent. So someone went into another bank, opened fraudulent accounts with fake ID, and set up an account, and they called it XYZ Corporation. Then these perpetrators stole our client's information with their MICR encoding number and put XYZ Corporation on the top of the checks. So it was a wrong name on the right account number that was going into a fraudulent account at another bank. So the system was fooled all the way through. So this now sits with these other banks to figure out, yeah, our policies and procedures were breached. How do we address this? We've already put the money back in the client's account. So it's real money these days that the thieves are coming after. I'll give you another one or two real quick ones. We had an older client private banking client who was contacted late one evening saying that her son was in jail. One of her sons was in jail in California, and very bright client, very, very well off, ran a very nice business for years, but retired now, 85 years old. And they convinced her to go into her other bank and take $10,000 cash out that morning and to mail it. And so she went and got $10,000 in $100 bills and put it in an envelope and went to a postage, whatever delivery place. And she contacted us, and it hadn't been taken out of the accounts with us, and we thought it didn't smell right. We said, well, why don't we call your son? He wasn't in jail. The whole thing was a fraud. So we encouraged her, and she did immediately go back into that post office place and find the envelope before it was mailed. And that was about 2 weeks ago. And then I actually had one, this will be the last one. I had one recently where I had the Dish Network at home, and I got a call from someone that came up as an 800 number, and it said Dish Network on my caller ID. And they told me that for me to get a discount, if I wanted a discount on my Dish bill for the next 12 months, I needed to go into Target and purchase a Target gift card, because this is a promotion that Target and the Dish were running together. And that Target gift card, I had to pay 1 year in advance for my next year's Dish service. But for that, I would get a 40% discount on my Dish bill over the course of the year. So I'll go buy the gift card for the full year service, and then I mail that. Oh, no, actually, I had to call them back, the 800 number, and they answered it Dish Network. And then they were going to take the card number over the phone, and the money was going to be gone. And I thought, this doesn't smell right. Nothing smells right. So I called the Dish about it. And they said, no, that's not us. And then I called back the company, and they were answering the phone Dish Network. And so they were pretending to be a company. So long and the short of it is, I could talk about this stuff all day. I could talk to you about the fraud that's been committed, the identity theft that's committed on clients. We probably get 10 of these a week from our client base. And it's just a constant managing of the process. And so we have to be diligent in what we do. And we have to hope that, we're in front of it enough that we stop a lot of it, because in many cases, the bank takes a loss too. So open for questions if you have them. There's a lot of detail around this, and I went over stuff quickly, but I also realize it's not an exciting topic. So that's about it.
Thank you, Andrew, so much. I think a lot of the time, some of the non-sexy topics get glossed over a little bit, but they're really, really important. And I think if we had an opportunity to go around the horn here with everybody on this meeting right now, everybody could share a personal story of either falling victim to one of those events, or at least somebody trying to pull one of those things off. So one thing that I was thinking about while you were talking is that, a lot of these smaller practices see these kind of higher tech cybersecurity things and so on and so forth as an extra cost. Well, it hasn't happened to me yet, so I'm not really going to worry about it until something happens. And I think that's kind of a common theme, and unfortunately, it may not be the best way to think about it, because just like you mentioned in that earlier example, $600,000, slipping out of the practice is a big deal.
Right.
And these things can be a huge deal, especially when it comes to, protected health information and other things. So those were just my thoughts while you were talking about this. Anybody else have anything they want to contribute or ask Andrew?
Yeah, I do actually. I speak with a lot of doctors about the HPA model, and so I have a lot of conversations with practices. And one of them went through. It's kind of interesting talking about fraud and banking and stuff from people you don't know. And then in this particular scenario, the administrator for this practice was actually calling the patients ahead of time. I just want to add this to just put a little more color into it in case this strikes a chord with any of the listeners. The office administrator did a couple things. The first is they were calling the patients ahead of time before they were coming in for their consultation or whatever they were doing, and letting them know that they were expected to pay in cash. And then the patient would show up and they would pay the cash to the people at the front desk that the office administrator was in cahoots with. They would do some funny business with the ledger. They would pocket the cash, and they started figuring out that they were able to do this without being caught and without messing up the numbers too much. And so we're basically for years asking for cash from patients, and it was only caught when one of the patients felt like it was weird and actually spoke directly with the doctor who owned the practice and said, do you guys have like a policy for paying cash? And he's like, what are you talking about? No. And he's like, well, I've been here the last 3 times I've been here, I've been asked to pay cash. And I feel like that is kind of off. And so that's what ended up happening. And then to add to that story, a lot of doctors want to work in their practice, and they like for people to provide infrastructure and do a lot of the things they don't want to do. They want to work with their hands and work with patients. And so in the same practice, the office administrator convinced this doctor to move his billing and collections over to a company that was owned by her friend. And so even in processing the bills, they were skimming on the billing side as well. So they were double dipping on the cash side with the patients, and then in cahoots with the billing company that was recommended by the staff to the doctor. And the billing and collections company was also skimming on his numbers as well. And he could not figure out for the life of himself that, well, what is happening? I feel like I'm working harder and harder and harder, and the needle's not really moving at all. And finally brought in a consult who basically had to do a complete reboot of all of the staff. And now they're in some aspects of litigation and some other things like that in trying to clean those things up. But I wanted to add that story because it's not just necessarily the people you don't know that are trying to gain your trust through reputable companies like Dish Network or DirecTV or whatever, but it's, there's this element of diligence inside the practice as well that it's important for the owners to keep an eye on the ball and not, these quality checks that need to be occurring inside the office. And but a lot of doctors are busy, they're trying to see patients and they're trying to keep their volume up, and they're trusting their staff to do the things that they pay the staff to do. And those things kind of happen. So I wanted to add that story too, just from a different side of the fence or a different perspective. And then I have a loaded question for you, Andrew. Mm-hmm. It sounds like Columbia's got a pretty good system for fraud protection. And I don't even know if you can answer this question, but I'm asking anyway. I have multiple banking relationships, so for different reasons. And I don't know if you can answer this, but are there banks that you know of or organizations that tend to do well in this? And more importantly, are there banks that you know of that tend to struggle with fraud protection?
Well, I mean, being honestly 100% objective and nothing about our bank. Ours is through a lot of trial and error over the years and adding services and software and all sorts of stuff. But I will tell you this, and I'm not a proponent of necessarily huge banks. I'm just not. But the larger their institution these days, the more technology they have to throw at stuff. So your credit card stuff is the example I use. That algorithm is set up by sophisticated companies with a lot of IT support behind them. So, unfortunately, a lot of the smaller institutions won't have that. They don't. But doesn't mean they're bad to work with. It just means that they're just not going to have as much sophistication on this stuff. They don't have the wherewithal to track it as well. But I'm not going to name any names about it. Some may and some may not. But I would say the further you go upstream, the more they're going to be able to track things these days.
Very diplomatic answer, Andrew.
That makes a lot of sense if you just consider the resources they have to allocate to that type of thing. So,
Yeah.
good questions, Grant. Nice story. Love to hear kind of boots on the ground stories of things that are happening to doctors that we know, unfortunately. Little side plug, if you're an HPA member and you have Data DX on board, that is an additional security feature that will help you prevent this type of thing in your own practice. So I just wanted to mention that because it's really topical to what Andrew's speaking about. One more question came in the chat from Christine. Andrew, do you recommend that people report when they realize they are being targeted? And if so, what agency or agencies should they report to?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, but I honestly, I don't know that law enforcement, they're so overwhelmed in most of the cities we live in these days with just stuff that they don't respond to anything. I mean, they're not showing up to major crimes, let alone this. But I would say that if you've got some sort of fraud going on and you've got a banker, you should have a good banker, right? Wherever you're banking, you should know your banker and you should be able to call them out and be on a first name basis with them. You should let them know, because then that way that service team around it will have an idea that, hey, let's keep a lookout on this and make a note of it. That would be my big thing, is just let your bank know, let your CPA know. Short of reporting it to a Better Business Bureau or something, that's great. I think what's better is to vocalize it. You communicate it to everyone. The story I told about the Target and the dish, if I'd have heard that prior to that, when that call came in, I would have known exactly what it is. If we just all verbalize these things to friends and family, that helps a lot. So I don't know if that's an answer, but banker, CPA, and verbalize it. That's what I would do.
Excellent.
Yep.
Christine with the thumbs up.
Okay.
Using the Teams features. I love it. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for kicking us off this morning.